ladies and gentlemen, I'm Richard Hodges, the Williams director, and it's wonderful to see so many people here tonight for the first in these Silk Road adventures. 9 adventures which will take us through to next June. I should say this is a historic evening because there in front of us is a camera and we are being streamed live on our website. So we're rather hopeful that there are many more taking part in this evening's lecture than the many hundreds who are here in the Harrison Auditorium tonight. As I think you're all aware, this series of lectures, the third year we've held a series of lectures. This year's lectures are on the occasion of the opening of Secrets of the Silk Road, a wonderful exhibition that will open here next February the 5th and run through to June. We're enormously excited by this exhibition. I've seen it in the Bowers Museum in California. It's now at Houston and it comes here in January. We're excited because it's the first occasion many of these treasures, and particularly these mummies, have been shown in the United States, and this will be the only East Coast venue in which they're on display. But I think rather better than the Bowers and better than Houston, we're hoping that the exhibition will be a great success, but the programming around it will be even better. And tonight's program is the first in that series of events associated with Secrets of the Silk Road. Now, I rather imagine many of you know Nancy Steinhardt, tonight's speaker. She's our curator of the Chinese art here in the museum, indeed of the rotunda immediately above us. She's been here since 1983, having studied at Harvard and briefly taught at Bryn Mawr College. She's no novice to this subject as well. She's written much on the architecture of the Silk Road and has written many books, some of which I suspect you know of: early Buddhist architecture in Japan, Chinese traditional architecture, Chinese imperial city planning, Chinese architecture, excuse me, as an editor and expander, and a recently Chinese architecture in the Beaux-Arts, of which she's a co-editor. She's also worked greatly with us on this exhibition, and she's working on other exhibitions as well that you might like to know about. The World of Kublai Khan, which is going to be shown at the Metropolitan Museum next year, and she's also been working on Echoes of the Past, the Buddhist cave temples of Xingtangshan, using some of the statues from the rotunda that's immediately above us, an exhibit that's just opening at the Smart Museum in Chicago. She's no better person than to launch this Silk Road adventure with tonight's talk, Great Sights on the Silk Road. Professor Steinhardt.
It's especially thrilling to see everybody here because tonight I have serious competition. I heard that the score is 4-0 Phillies, bottom of the third. And we'll try to keep track of the game, and I'll let you know what the score is. Laura is supposed to tell me when this is over. I have no idea what's going on in the other games. It doesn't really matter at this point. So the Phillies will take us to the 3rd week in October, or 4th week in October, and then we move into the Eagles, who hopefully will take us to the 3rd week in January. And when that ends, 2 weeks later is when you want to come to the museum. In February 4th is the official date, and it opens to the public a little bit later. So, probably everyone here has heard of the Silk Road or Silk Roads. Probably everyone has looked at maps that show where they were. And here are 2 of them, and here are 2 more. As you can see, the challenge this evening is to present in about an hour, clearly, logically, and not superficially, an introduction to possible to define as 2 millennia, if not more. The real challenge is where to begin and where to end. Because every month, if not every week, a new discovery startles us into reevaluating everything we thought of the show, Secrets of the Silk Road, which, as I mentioned, opens in February. I've tried to use as many objects from the show as possible tonight, and as I do, so there are a few and just a little more from the Silk Road, and start with the basics. The Silk Roads are an extensive, interconnected network of trade routes across stretch of Asia, includes some of the most rugged terrain on the face of the earth. The ability to cross successfully relies on fixed points, usually oases, where the representatives of the various cultures meet, worship, sometimes stay, transmit their skills and religions, and then die. Some cities on the routes have long histories and are well known. And some Hami and Huoma recorded in text were the starting points for scholars and expeditionaries in the 19th and the 20th centuries and have been for Chinese archaeologists since 1949. The most famous name associated with the Silk Roads is the geographer Ferdinand Von Richthofen. His dates are in 1877. Richthofen has hundreds of entries on the web. The Silk Roads have hundreds times more, and dozens of them explain why the concept and the term can be traced much, much earlier. As you've seen on the maps, or as you see on these 2 maps here, there were 2 main routes and some, but sometimes people extend further, 1, 2, sometimes this is considered a third, 1, 2, 1, 2, and then the routes linking people to the south. From the China side, the northern route begins in Xi'an, the capital of China, for most of the period from the last millennium BCE through the first millennium CE. Traveling westward, the route crosses the Chinese province of Shanxi, and there it splits into through Turfan, Talgar, and Almaty. The route splits again west of Kashgar. So Kashgar is right. Is that right? Am I getting it? There, it's right here. Okay. So it splits again west of Kashgar, one branch heading down the Alai Valley toward Tirmez and Balkh, the other through Kokand and the Fergana Valley, then west across the Karakum Desert towards Merv, where it briefly joins the southern route, and then branches off northwest or north of the Aral and Caspian Seas and onto the Black Sea. Continuing from Fergana, today in Uzbekistan, the route continues to Persia and Iraq, eventually joining the Roman Empire and then Rome itself. The southern route, meanwhile, runs through China, from China through North India, Turkestan, Khorasan, Mesopotamia, and into Anatolia with fewer branches, and the last stretch must be undertaken by sea. There have also been sea routes across Asia. Chinese tombs that were never native to China are the first evidence of the Silk Road. And this evidence BCE. So we are interested in materials like jade and lapis lazuli and gold, of course, but that's why I brought in Queen Tea to show you that trade and commerce are what makes all of this happen. The jade on the left, excavated in Liaoning province of northeastern China from the 3rd millennium BCE. Lapis lazuli around 1700 BCE from China, or from the central plain, Henan province. The starting point for most discussions of the Silk Road is the year 54 or 50. Routed the Achaemenids of Persia. The Parthians devastated Crassus's troops in a matter of hours. Accounts of the battle say that the Parthians, in places like Antioch, who left records of their gods in places like Commagene, so Antioch, silk. We know from excavations that the Chinese had both gold and silk, certainly in the 2nd century BCE, and that they used it, for instance, to lace together pieces of jade into jade bodysuits for use in burial. BCE to circa 200 CE. The Chinese were fighting their own battle in Xinjiang, Chinese Central Asia, leading to a theory published in 1957 that Roman soldiers, by way of being captured by the Parthians, became prisoners in wars fought against the Chinese, and thereby was the direct contact between Chinese and Chinese silk and the Romans. However it happened, the Romans definitely knew about silk before the last century BCE, and they wanted it. And probably the Parthians, who were a mercantile group without fixed points, without clear boundaries, were the middlemen if this description of the transaction is accurate. The other story is probably what's recorded in this mural from a cave in Dandan Oilik, a site in Xinjiang today. The story goes that a Chinese princess who was to be married to someone from Western regions snuck silk moth eggs out of China in her headdress that would ripen after. And this perhaps is an implement that would have been used in the manufacture of silk. This is all speculation. There's no inscription that tells us what we're looking at here. The last thing I want to say by way of introduction is that many of the most important sites with the most spectacular finds were first explored by Europeans and, in one case, Japanese at the turn of the 20th century. We know them through the maps that they made and the photographs, old black and white photographs. Even if you feel that these expeditionaries were pillagers and robbers, and they are names well known to you, Oral Stein, Paul Paleo, the two Albert von Lecoq and Grunwedel, in this picture, Sven Hedden, Count Otani of Japan, Owen Ladmore, and a few others. Even if you perceive of them as pillagers and robbers, they're the ones who made us so desperately want to understand this world between China and Iran. Some of their books still have not been superseded. In the decades after the door shut to this kind of investigation, when no one could get to the sites, Central Asia became a kind of vast dumping ground for the inexplicable. I vividly remember lectures by some of the luminaries of the Chinese and the Indian and the Persian art fields before the Silk Roads had opened, who would look at something together and say, it must come from the Silk Roads, with no further explanation. And everyone in the room would nod in agreement. As you'll see in the catalog, and as you'll see in the lecture tonight, the Silk Roads and Central Asia certainly are no longer a vast dumping ground for the inexplicable. I'm going to divide this material into 7 topics, each roughly concentrated at one site or one location, and I will do them roughly chronologically. So we begin at Shambhala, or Sampul, perhaps in the 2nd century CE, maybe as much as 4 centuries earlier. The top shows a centaur playing a long horn, the bottom a male figure holding a spear. At one time the cloth was used for pants, but originally, as I mentioned, it was from tapestry. The centaur, of course, we assume, at which they come. It may be a standard technique for incorporating the countless religions, philosophical systems, and local beliefs of the peoples who pass through these sites, who stop long enough to paint walls, end up dying at the place, and then bringing the possessions they acquired into their tomb. We just don't know. The full figure would stand 6 times the height of the centaur. His eyes and nose should inform us that he's a Westerner, but the same cemetery contains all the objects that you see here, from lacquer from Han China to a portrait of someone from regions to the west, to more tapestry, to this wooden piece, to this wooden piece whose explanation has not been found, to this figure who might remind you of something you've seen in a medieval tapestry from Europe. Another textile, excavated more than 45 years ago at the site called Nia, shows a similar composite but not necessarily blend of what seems almost certainly to have come from the West, but almost equally certainly to have come from the East, and similarly defies explanation for why these objects coexist on one piece of dyed cotton. Besides the pattern areas that seem to divide the textile into sections, we see three specific images that we would expect to have meaning. First, a nude figure with cornucopia. And we'll use cornucopia here because it's the word that describes what you see. There have been at least 7 different interpretations for who she is. She might be a bodhisattva, an agent of the Buddha, not named. She might be Demeter, the Greek goddess of the harvest, Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess, Anahita, the Persian goddess of water and fertility, Hariti, the Indian guardian goddess of children, Tyche, the Greco-Gandharan goddess, and Ardasho, the Kushan goddess of wealth. Kushans, if this is a term not familiar to you, are the Indo-Aryan people who ruled northwest India, the area more even the areas today, Pakistan and into Afghanistan, in the last century BCE and 1st century CE. People who embraced Buddhism. Many of you may recognize their 2 headless figures, 2 of the rulers, Kanishka and Bhima Kadphises. And you may know that this coin of Kanishka's has on the back of it what many believe is the first representation of the Buddha. And so if we knew Kanishka's dates, which we don't, we would know when this coin had been made. This is one of the extraordinary challenges and principles of Silk Road archaeology. And so my second principle, just when you're convinced you figured something out, look across Asia, because you will find another possibility just as convincing. When it comes to the Silk Road's instinct and judgment may not serve you as well as it does in other circumstances. Next to our figure, you remember our tapestry, right? And the 2 other places that are noteworthy that we'll see are this toe and this lion tail, and then this. So next to her, we have this winding animal, right? Well, next to her, we have this. Perhaps a serpent. Well, perhaps, but this animal would be a serpent or dragon only to someone with Chinese sensibility. Someone viewing it with South Asian focus would see a makara, a mythological fish dragon beast who appears in early Indian art. And then finally this, the foot and the lion tail, Hercules, Samson, we just don't know. Neon, a site from which quite a few objects will come in February in the Taklamakan Desert. The site spreads on 2 sides of a river. It's enclosed. It was originally enclosed by a wall. It had administrative offices, 5 cemeteries, orchards, more than 20 kilns, woodworking and glass workshops, and 5 foundries. And excavation confirms that there was a Buddhist community, because on the left you're looking at a stupa. Most of our associations for Nia are from the 2nd through 4th centuries. Again, the period of the Han Dynasty, the later part, and 2 centuries later. Residences were built on wooden frames with walls made of adobe or woven willow branches and mud. They were large, they were on elevated platforms known by the Chinese word kong, and sometimes these elevated platforms lined the walls of a room. From Nia, we have the shoes and the textile. The shoes that you see here, one of these is in the exhibition, as are some textiles that we'll see in a moment. The stand, we're not sure for what. On the left, the shoes suggest a lifestyle of luxury. The textiles sometimes are inscribed. This one will be coming, we date it 2nd to 4th centuries. The inscription, and this was excavated in 1995. The inscription reads, "May this marriage between noble families bring countless generations of descendants." Similarly, another textile from Nia reads, "May this one-of-a-kind brocade bring parents generation after generation of descendants. It was found on the face of a corpse. This corpse is not coming, but as you know, others are. The patterns appear in long rows, but the imagery, if we look at another textile from Nia, the words, the characters are Chinese, the inscriptions, expressions of a hope for an afterlife the way a Chinese would express it. But when we look closely, we see a figure like this, and this does not come from East Asia. They take us all the way across and then back again. Mythological felines, horned animals, potpourri, melting pot. These words hardly do justice to what was happening in these towns literally in the middle of the desert sand. Even today, to get to Nia, one must travel by camelback. There is literally no other road. There is too much sand around it. And so when we see these, and then we have this textile with a very ambiguous inscription that goes the 5 phases or elements from the east to profit China. Again, a blending of China and the regions to the west. Also excavated at Nia are these wooden images. They are figures that might remind you of Buddhist deities. It's possible Buddhism was present in China at this time, but usually the Buddhist figures in China aren't this voluptuous. To find closer comparisons, we look to India, and the figures here are not Buddhist. They're native female spirits, and again, you have not just a mixing of nationalities that might have brought objects to Nia, you also have a mixing of faiths. India, West Asia, Han China, Greece, Kushans. Shambhala and Nia, like Rourou and Endera and Lolan and Miran, and that's Miran here, Lolan on the top, Endera on the lower right. All of them have surviving a large stupa built on a cylindrical drum with a 4-sided base below it, and in front of it was an open courtyard. This is a standard plan, not only in Central Asia. This is a plan that we can trace to the Kushans themselves. We can begin at Sarcophagus, a Kushan ceremonial site today in Afghanistan. This is Central Asia, the Taklamakan Desert. This is Xinjiang province near the modern city of Turfan. So what I'm interested in is this part and then what's in front. Much more interesting, this is north central China, a Buddhist monastery in the 6th century. This is Korea, Buddhist monastery in the, here's Korea, Buddhist monastery in the 6th century, our main structure, our enclosure, and what's in front. And this is Japan in the 7th century. So perhaps, it's really fun to play with pictures. Perhaps it begins on the Silk Road, but we find the same plan in Buddhist worship space as late as the 7th century. Then, the next site, Yingpan. I wanted to mention, just in this mix, from Nia Lolan, from one of the sites from which I just showed you this plan, we have this sarcophagus which is coming. And here we have native symbols of China, including the 3-toed raven and the sun, and on the other side we would have the toad and hare and the moon. And these that begin in Lolan appear in Han China 2nd century BCE here, circa the year 0 here, 5th century Korea here. Yingpan, another site known since Oral Stein. I should bring in one of Oral Stein's maps here. Contemporary to Shambhala, and also with remains of a stupa, and also with objects from the Han Dynasty, and also with mummies. The one on the left has become a kind of international symbol of the Silk Roads and of the site of Nia in particular. This haunting corpse, the one on the left, was found just as you see it, a nearly perfectly preserved male, about 30 years old, standing just under 2 meters tall. He was found on his back in a wooden coffin. He is the tallest Caucasoid corpse found to date. There were more than 100 tombs in this cemetery. Most had been looted by the time the Chinese were able to begin excavating in 1989. Most of them had, as I said, wooden coffins, not as elaborated as his. These are pieces from his coffin. But inside the coffin, the body was wrapped in strips of cloth, and it was placed on top of reed grass, and that was supported by a wooden armature. In other words, this is what was underneath the body, and here then the reed grass was on top of it. Now, also intriguing, many things are intriguing about this corpse. One of the things that people note the most is the mask. The mask is made of flax or hemp. The eyes, the eyebrows, and the mustache are painted in black, lips painted in red, and there is gold leaf in the forehead. As I already mentioned, anything on the silk roads encourages us to stretch. This is not the first time that someone used gold leaf across a headdress. Now, this is in no way to suggest that ancient Mesopotamia or Egypt were linked to the Silk Road. This is to say that in the absence of text, because we have no information about this man, we turn to known information, such as gold usually means royalty, certainly it means wealth. And so we assume that this was a very wealthy man. Perhaps he was royal, perhaps he just acquired gold. And for that reason, the humble tomb in which he's buried, the simple reeds on which he's placed, the wooden armature, are all the more extraordinary. Also in his tomb, well, he has a pillow, he has, look at this, what's the source of a naked youth with a cape carrying a sword, some kind of lasso in his hand, and the horned animal. These motifs, taken out of context, could place us in medieval Europe or West Asia. The armband with pattern, that's what you see here. Remains of food. He also has this extraordinary miniature garment. And there's no good explanation for this. Some people think that it is associated with a child and thus hope for progeny. Some people think that it is an offering that he will be bringing into the next life with him. Textiles from Neon have much in common with the ones that we've seen already. And in this case, we have another passage. So we've seen this one, the passage here, which goes, Han Khan offers this silk as a blessing to his parents. Just one more side from the Taklamakan Desert. This is Miran. It's a little bit different from the ones that we have looked at before because there's so much architecture above ground, including the remains of Buddhist sanctuaries. And inside the sanctuaries was stucco sculpture, and I guess I don't have any sculpture. And then they were heavily painted. The interior walls give the name of an artist that transcribes as T-I-T-A, perhaps Titus, but the script is Kharashti, which is a native Indian script. The site is dated 3rd to 4th centuries, after which it was abandoned. So these may look Buddhist to you. Oh, it's here, okay. So here we have one of the stucco heads, one of the stupas. The face on the right, people who know Fatimid Egypt like to make that comparison. Of course, we're 1,000 years too late if we think about the Fatimids. This cap, we don't know where from. The use of shading is something that people see in Chinese painting beginning in the 7th or 8th century. And they trace it to Central Asia, specifically to this site. And then we have on the right what sometimes is likened to a Roman residential interior, and then what we think of as a Buddha leading a group of monks or disciples. This Buddha, this figure, leads me to my second topic. The first one was the longest because so much of the Taklamakan Desert is coming here in February. If I had 2 hours, I would spend just as long on cave temples and their contents, particularly 3 of them. But I only want to mention these sites and talk about the connection to lead me temporally into my next topic. So here on the left, a statue in the Sacra Museum, Harvard, that some people think is the earliest Buddhist statue made in China, made in China. It is considered 3rd to 4th century because of the painting from Miran. What you see here are the contenders, the 3 earliest Buddhist statues, we believe, that we have freestanding, not in caves. So here's this one that relates to Central Asia and has a Western face. People use the term Gandharan region, if you know that word. This one's in the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. It has a date of 338, and it brings us into the world of China. People see this as the Sinification process has taken place. And then we have this one in Kyoto, in a private museum called the Fuji Yurin-kan. On the right is the Silk Road cave site that I feel I can't leave out. It's Bingling-se. It is in the western part of Gansu province, and it dates to at least this cave, cave 169, dates to the 4th century. And here is our connection, and the reason that the statue on the left is a contender for our earliest Buddhist image that is freestanding. So where have I been? Again, just to remind you, Chang'an, the starting point, Dunhuang Caves, the caves I just mentioned are here near Lanzhou. Kucha is the site of Kizil Caves I'm about to mention, and then over here we're in Kashgar again, and further. Cave 169 at Bingling-se is filled with imagery that we can now date to the 4th century. All of it is much more valuable to us than almost anything that has come out of China in recent years. I'm just showing you a few pictures. What I'm particularly interested in is this figure wearing a pleated skirt. You see her slightly larger here. Here it's a Buddhist image. This is the top of a lacquer sarcophagus that I'm going to come to again later. I'm showing it to you as context, because its date is late 5th century. And what we see here is our same pleated skirt that people associate with Korean and Korean dress. Our lacquer sarcophagus comes from the Ningxia Autonomous Region, North China. Well, this painting is from a tomb in Japan, south of the city of Nara, and it has a date of 7th century. And we now can take this back right here to the Buddhist cave site at Bingling-se. We can take it in many examples to Korea, so here is another one of them. In fact, this pleated skirt is often considered a feature of female Korean dress in around the 5th century. This is the second site that I wanted to mention from the second of the major cave sites. This one is the Kizil, but Kizil is in the same place as Kuntura. Just to show you some of the pictures, the bird holding the jewels is something that we trace to Afghanistan. Our 2-headed bird still doesn't have any explanation in China, but the date of this cave is 4th century, and these are also from Kuntura. And then, of course, we have the Dunhuang Caves. The Dunhuang Caves are a little bit different because what they do is place Buddhism in China. And the sites I've shown you before then still are outside the Chinese sphere. They do this by painting an ethnically Indian or South Asian figure and putting him inside a Chinese roof. And so this little exercise is a chance to express my 4th principle, which is when studying the Silk Roads, use all available evidence. Painting, sculpture, architecture, textiles, metalwork cannot ever be studied independent of the other ones. Buddhism and the Silk Roads are the purest and truest use of this term multiculturalism. And so I had mentioned in passing Afghanistan, and to complete the picture, we would also have to talk about Afghanistan. There's the ceiling I just showed you. This is in Afghanistan. The god of the sun, perhaps, at the top, but there are Central Asian versions of him also. Now my third, fourth, and fifth topics, which come together under the framework, what's going on in the 3rd through 6th centuries. On the top, you're looking at the plan of a tomb from Gansu province. On the bottom, you're looking at the plan of a Korean tomb. So we are in Korea, over here, Korean Peninsula, and Gansu province would be right around here, this part of the Yellow River. The one in Korea is literally on the Yalu River. In fact, when you stand there, you can see it and can think about North Korea on the other side. Both of them date to around the year 400. 2 chambers connected by a corridor, 2 different kinds of ceilings. Korea on the right, Gansu province of China on the left, a hierarchic figure. A ceiling with constellations or other heavenly bodies. Korea's on the right, Gansu province is on the left in every case. A large flowering tree. Some sign of nativity. There's always some clue that tells us where we are. So that here we have an adobe structure because this is the desert, and here we have the spotted fur garments that are worn by people, women and men. In the Korean Peninsula, it's very cold there. Now we're at our sarcophagus from Guyuan, where you will see our hierarchic figure at the top. You will see some sign of nativity, in this case the occupant himself, wearing a heavy garment, leggings, and a hat with what's the word I'm looking for, is with something hanging behind him to show us that he's protecting himself from the cold. And here's our pleated skirt that we've looked at before. But we also have the Buddhist world on this sarcophagus. So here we have a Buddhist deity. These are scenes of Chinese filial piety, how people are supposed to behave in society. Man in relation to his ruler, wife in relation to the husband, younger brother in relation to older child, to parent, wife to husband. Same sarcophagus, where we have our occupant, our Buddhist deity, our Confucian imagery, our hierarchic deities, which in this case come from the Taoist world, what we call a Parthian shot, a figure traveling forward but turning backwards to shoot behind him, and then this roundel, beaded roundel, which always must come from Sasanian Iran, and floral motifs that could come from many parts of the world. We've seen all the same elements in Korea. We've seen them in Western China. We've seen them in the Ningxia-Hui Autonomous Region. We've seen our garments in Korea on the bottom and in Bingling's Cave 169 on the left. So this is 3, and now I bring into it number 4. This is from the Silk Roads. It's from Astana, a site from which we will have examples in the show, but this could never travel. This is one of the earliest examples, one of the earliest pieces of paper that survives in the world. The date is 4th century, and what do we see? All that we've seen already. Our occupant with a head covering over him, a servant, food for his entertainment, our raven in the sun, our toad and hare in the moon, our flowering tree. The same is true. I'm now in this period of the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th centuries. In Western China, especially North China, where this world of imagery from the Han all comes together, and where we're trying to figure out what comes from where. A tomb in Datong, near the Great Wall. This is what the tomb looks like. Datong is a city known to you from the Jeongwon Case. What do we have in Datong? Well, here's our pleated skirt. Here's our flowering tree. Here is our occupant with servants smaller than he is. Here's the Guyuan sarcophagus motif. Here it is from the city of Datong. Now I've brought in another tomb from the Datong region where we have our similar motif, where we have our occupant being served, occupant again, our cart, all the motifs that we've seen. Another tomb, Datong, 4th century CE. Here's our Sasanian roundel pattern, our occupant, our Chinese Taoist deities. On the left, Xiangtangshan. The director mentioned this site. We have about 6 pieces from the Xiangtangshan caves in our collection. They're in northern China. The dynasty is not Chinese. The date 550 to 577, a fixed date. On the right, my piece of relief sculpture is from Takibustan in Iran. And it is in almost a line-for-line comparison of what we have up here. Now, this brings me to my 5th principle, which I am going to call old-fashioned art history, or Morelli lives. Giovanni Morelli, 19th century physician scientist, who is sometimes called the father of modern connoisseurship. In the absence of records and in the absence of texts, the way that we try to pin down what's happening on the Silk Roads is by comparing earlobes and nostrils and fingernails and hand position, place by place and line by line. The tombs that come from China in the 6th century, all during a period of non-Chinese rulers, are perfect expressions of what's going on in the Silk Roads, now transferred almost 1,000 miles to the east. So here I am in Hebei province, and this is the tomb of someone known as the Rourou Princess. Yes, she's a non-Chinese. She was promised in marriage at the age of 5 to the 8-year-old named Gao Zhan, who was the child of an emperor. She died at 13 and was buried alone. We have a bird, symbol of the South. At the top of her tomb, we have guards, and then we have these 2 figurines. 2 humped camels are not native to this part of China, but they are in China because they traveled on the Silk Roads. This figure, interpreted as a shaman, was found in her tomb. He's not Chinese. It's anybody's guess what his ethnicity might be. Another tomb from this group, the city of Taiyuan in Shanxi province. This tomb belongs to a man named Rourou. You'll see in a moment that we've already seen something from his tomb. These are some of the most spectacular paintings that have come out of the 6th century in China, and I don't use the word spectacular lightly. The tomb was excavated between 1979 and 1981. Rourou died in the year 570. He is described in histories as a corrupt cousin of the emperor. His tomb had been robbed, so that a mere 870 objects remain, but you can see the quality, and this painting is often published because of the sensitivity of the figures. We have no idea what his ethnicity is. This is the tomb from which I showed you the trumpets. Constellations on his ceiling. This is just what this kind of site should look like. This tomb only slightly prepared us for this one that was excavated a little bit later in the 1990s. It belonged to an official named Xu Xianxiu. He wears, so again we have our red bird, or red birds in this case. This is what the tomb looks like. It's a simple tomb, most of them are. He wears the spotted garment, probably ermine, that appears and is native to Korea at this time and a century earlier. And here we have a Korean tomb just to show you how close the connection is. This figure flies upside down in his tomb. From the Chinese side, we would assume it is a wind god or some kind of nature spirit. Figures who help him, who guard him, and now look what they are wearing. Here's our Sasanian roundel pattern. But the head could well be, I think I have a close-up coming up, I'm pretty sure. The head could well be a Buddhist deity. Here we have our horned animals in Sasanian roundel pattern. We saw this before, and so I'm bringing the Taklamakan Desert back into the 6th century Low-Ray tomb. Here it is in blown up version, Sasanian roundel, Buddhist deity, Anahita, Mithra, all the names that I gave you before could be who we are seeing on the tomb of Low-Ray. And this ring also, this is the top of it. The slide's kind of hard to look at. The gold that you see is on the left. It defies interpretation. This perhaps is the time to mention my 6th principle, which is choose your friends and colleagues wisely, especially your linguist friends. One can never know enough or enough languages to know how to do research on these objects. Then we come to the famous ewer, so famous that it's usually just called the silver ewer. It was excavated in the tomb of the General Li Xian and his wife in Guyuan, the same place from which I showed you the lacquer sarcophagus. We don't know his ethnicity, it's disputed. He died in 569, his wife died in 547, and presumably she was reburied to be buried with him. So again, this is this sarcophagus about 100 years earlier, but from the same place. There were 255 figurines placed at the entrance to his tomb. The faces do not appear to us to be Chinese, but we wouldn't particularly estimate or guesstimate what their ethnicity is. Most of the objects had been looted, but the ceiling had collapsed, and these two were survived. We've seen a similar ring already. And then this piece of glass that's been studied with spectroscopy. It's only 4 millimeters thick. The raised part's about 7 millimeters. It is so transparent that looking from one side, one can see the other side. It's been determined that the glass was soda lime and probably made in Iran under Sasanian rule. The ewer stands 37.5 centimeters, 12.8 diameter, 12.8 centimeters at the widest diameter. It has a duckbill spout. The handle has the extraordinary head that you see right here, and also animal faces here and here. And of course, the images are what people are most interested in. There are 3 male-female pairs. One interpretation is that it is a man about to go to war. And so we have the romantic scene of the husband and wife's last night together, their exchange of vows, the woman encouraging her warrior husband to fight valiantly, and then the parting. She may be giving him her love wish in a small box. The other interpretation is much more specific, that this is the judgment of Paris. In this case, the female would be Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Paris has rejected the royal and military powers offered by Hera and Athena, and instead it decides to accept Aphrodite's offer to help him win Helen of Troy. In this interpretation, we would have Paris's abduction of Helen, that is when he's wearing the helmet, then the reunification of Helen and Menelaus, but in that interpretation, the third scene is not adequately explained, but it's not clear that either of those is correct. What's the date? Where was it made? Probably late 5th, early 6th century, because we have 569 as the latest possible date. As for the maker, the best guess is a Roman artisan, but not working in Rome, possibly working as far away as the Sasanian Empire, or perhaps an artisan in latter-day provincial Rome, perhaps someone working for the Bactrians or the Hephthalites. This object was found in the tomb of Feng He, his dates 438 to 501, near the city of Datong. He was not Chinese, he was a Xianbei who had moved to Luoyang on the Central Plain, when the Toba-Wei court moved there in 493. He worked in the imperial guard, he managed imperial pastures, and this gave him a rank which entitled him to the kinds of objects with which he was buried. This plate in his tomb must have been made by Sasanians, and it compares, of course, to many Sasanian gold and silver plates that we have in museums all over the world. I just mentioned the city of Luoyang, capital of China for much of its history from the last millennium BCE through almost the year 1000. Not the main capital, but one of the capitals. Here in the Chinese heartland, we find evidence of the Persian religion Zoroastrianism. You're looking at a rubbing here of relief from the tomb of a man named Jin Ke, excavated in Luoyang dating to the 6th century. And we would think this was a Chinese deity, except that there is an inscription with the name of a Zoroastrian deity. We have the same thing here, the Cenotaph of Lady Yuan in the Boston Museum. Because of the location, we know that this belonged to a Chinese person who was associated with the royal house. No one would ever know that the figure was a Zoroastrian deity if we didn't have the inscription. The inscription is the clue to the imagery down here. So now we're looking back here and we have to ask, is it the god of wind? Is it the god of thunder? Is this perhaps a Zoroastrian deity also? Another tomb of the Yuan family, Yuan Shao, who was buried in Luoyang in the year 529. Constellations on his ceiling, just what we would expect. And this figure in his tomb, it stands only about 6 inches, but the boots and the hair are noteworthy. We don't think this was Yuan Shao, but this was a foreigner who was present at his court. Now, my next topic, if I had time, this is, I think I'm on number 5 now, my last part of the 3rd through 6th centuries, would be to talk about the world of the Sogdians. So I only mention them, the funerary couches and the screens behind them, and the sarcophagi. 7 associated with the Sogdians have been uncovered on the Silk Road in the last few years. What binds them together is the people who commissioned them and for whom they were made. The Sogdians, like the Parthians, had few fixed points of origin. They traveled back and forth on the Silk Roads, usually as merchants. The Sogdians came to China, and one among them always had the title of Sabao, literally someone in charge of Sogdian affairs at the Chinese court. These Sabao died in China. As I mentioned, 7 of their tombs have been uncovered. And yes, this is supposed to be a fire temple, and these figures are not wearing Chinese dress. These are all excavated in China on the North Central Plain from our Sogdians. And here are a few more of the pictures. So this portrait of the occupant of one of the tombs is especially interesting. The male is often portrayed in his ethnicity, and his wife is a Chinese beauty. We have the same thing here from the period of Mongolian rule, portrayal of the nativity, and then the Chinese beauty. This wall painting dates to the 13th or 14th century. So now I move on to my 6th topic, and this objects from this tomb are coming to the exhibition in February. These are from the tomb of a princess named Li Jingxun, who died in the city of Chang'an in the year 608. Remarkably, her tomb was found undisturbed. She was the great-granddaughter of Li Xian, the man who had the silver ewer in his tomb. That is on her father's side, and granddaughter of the emperor of the non-Chinese dynasty, Northern Zhou. She was the daughter and the sister of the first 2 emperors of the Sui dynasty on her mother's side. The necklace is the greatest treasure found in her tomb. She was wearing it when she was laid to rest. The loop ends, the hook clasp, the spiritual beads, decorated with granulation and inlaid with semi-precious materials, All are techniques that must have been learned from the Greco-Roman world, or from the Parthians, or from the Sasanians. But interestingly, they are found in jewelry excavated at Tilla Tepe in Afghanistan, perhaps the greatest crossroad of the Silk Roads, and the date here is 25 to 50 CE. Afghanistan and Tilla Tepe would be full lectures in themselves, but I wanted to mention them because they take us all the way to Korea. Again, just to whet your appetite for what the Silk Roads is all about. On the right, a crown excavated in a Korean tomb. On the left, one from Afghanistan. So that's my 7th topic, and then this necklace. Sometimes this necklace is identified as a symbolism of the 7 treasures of Buddhism because of the 7 largest jewels. These are all also from the tomb of Princess Li Jingxun. So as I mentioned, some of this will be in the exhibition. These objects are from Guama, and we also will have Guama in the exhibition. It is near Xinjiang's border with Kazakhstan. The most haunting object is the mask, and it is coming. So far, it's the only gold mask found in Xinjiang. It is as haunting in many ways as this mask. This one on the right, as I mentioned, is not coming. But the people of Guama are known for liking rubies and using a lot of them in their objects. Where is the mask from, especially a gold death mask? Well, since we enjoy what we're doing, let's say that we don't know who made it, but why not think about the Scythians, 4th through 7th centuries BCE. Scythians were also participants in the Silk Road. They wore death masks, and so I brought this in. They were as known to the Greeks through Herodotus as they were to the Chinese because they came into China. My 7th principle, however, is that very occasionally, and only on the Silk Roads, and I'm using this as my example, sometimes something can actually be unique. It's very rare in Asia when objects are mass-produced and when they're made for the funerary world that something would be truly unique. But in what we're going to see and in what we're talking about tonight, very occasionally, certainly in the juxtaposition, some of what you're seeing is unique. In fact, my other comment is that this that we're doing here is also a lot of fun. In fact, students who take the Central Asia Archaeology course always say it's the best course I teach, until it's time for them to write the papers. And then they have to take an object and they have to trace its route from somewhere to somewhere else. And I think I have probably at least 50% of papers from the course I taught last semester still incomplete because people haven't traced it. Well, so my last principle is sometimes when we deal with the Silk Roads, one's cup is too full. Hopefully not in life, but maybe with the Silk Roads. At a certain point, when we feel our cup is overflowing, then we say, okay, let's stop and at least publish what we've got. But we always know that with the answer, we don't have the answer. The last site, and in fact the one from which a third of the objects in our exhibition is coming, is Astana, where some of you have been. This is the site of this piece of painting, and it's the site of these 2 tomb figurines. You are going to see many figurines, including these, the ethnicity of the one on the right, probably the Chinese side of Central Asia, the one on the left. Anyone's guess? You're going to see the figurines with the paper arms. Perhaps they were puppets, it's not known. We are going to see a lot of objects of daily life and a lot that look Chinese from Astana. That's because there were a lot of Chinese living in Astana, and it's a largely Chinese cemetery, and the people were not royalty, and so we have objects like this in contrast to gold. A few decorative objects that are very much the style or the vogue of the people of the time. Women used to wear dresses with yokes like that. in the Tang Dynasty. These are all Astana textiles. Some of them are coming. We will have some remains of food that survived in the desert. Now, if I were to continue this, I would go from the 9th to 13th centuries, and I just have one picture from East here, just to say that even after the Tang Dynasty ends in 907 and the Silk Roads almost close, the latter-day Silk Roads certainly persist. And we see them across Xinjiang province, and this is this kind of obscure site, Beshbalik. We see them among the people called the Uyghurs, and this is 11th century, their cemetery, and we see them up and down the caves in Dunhuang. Were I to continue further, we would talk about what happens in the 11th century when deities from the Western, not the Chinese zodiac, find their place in Chinese tombs and in Chinese Buddhist paintings, and in this case, these are also the same deities, but now in Chinese form. All I can really say in conclusion is that if you were dazzled by what you saw this evening, prepare to be more dazzled year by year as objects continue to be excavated along the Silk Roads. Always be prepared for the unexpected. If you see something in Japan and you see something in Iran and they appear similar, don't throw out the possibility out of hand. Think that maybe because of the Silk Roads, this could have happened. The centuries of travel along the Silk Roads were times when the exchange could not have occurred without the three cultural giants, China, India, and Iran, each with several millennia of art production. But they also could not have occurred without a route along which these objects and forms and religions could have traveled. And finally, I hope to see all of you at the exhibition. If the pictures tonight seem exciting, they hardly prepare you for what you'll see here in February.
The score apparently is 4-0 at the top of the 7th, whatever that means. I play cricket.
All that in 1 minute, there's a lot of strikeouts. Good.
After that dazzling talk, would there be any questions? We've traveled a long way. Nancy, what I wanted to ask you, what was going along the Silk Road from the east to the west and the west to the east? What were they selling?
The silk, spices, glass, metalwork, anything that you saw could have been bought by somebody and made its way into a tomb.
Have we any questions?
Yes.
Please.
Is there any evidence that it was much greener in those days?
No. There are. That's a very good question. Some of the current studies are ecologically based, not just of the Silk Roads, but all over the world. Try to understand how trade happened. So the question was it greener then than it is now? As far as I know, not significantly. As far as I know, the Silk Roads can only happen because these are oases. And it required traveling usually hundreds of miles from site to site. Every place where people stopped, there had to be water. So there was water certainly at each of them.
Other questions? Yes, please.
The woman that we saw pictures of with the beautiful, almost completely intact, what period was she?
Oh, the corpse, you mean?
Yes.
The corpses are actually first millennium BCE, which is extraordinary. Yeah, they're very early, Chinese Dynasty Zhou. The ones from Nian would be Han Dynasty. But the woman, if you're mentioning a woman, she's from the first millennium BCE. Yeah.
I thought it's fascinating they found food. Did you say food?
Yeah. Yeah, the question is just remarking, yes. And it's more fascinating that it's been preserved and it's coming. And I'll be very interested to see, maybe we'll see the crate that it comes in, what the food will come in. Yes, there will be food here.
A spring roll.
Has there been any genetic studies done on the mummies?
There definitely have, and that's the subject of next month's lecture, right? Next month, Victor Mayer, who's really the king of Silk Road studies and also on the Penn faculty, will be talking about the mummies and DNA testing.
And Spencer Wells will be talking on the DNA project to find in April here.
With all the controversy around the identification of these pieces, is there anybody laying claim, like cultures or nations, to pieces? Is there anybody coming forward wanting to argue about who owns what?
Well, there's always controversy, and there are always people who will claim who owns what. But nothing so major that it's going to shatter anything, I think, that we've seen published already. Yeah, who owns these different objects in the Silk Road? Great. Well, that was why I decided to show the picture of the 7, I call them expeditionaries because I don't have a better word. Excavation and what happens to the objects is controversial, and we at the museum are very aware of this. But in this case, if not for people who were pillaging in 1900, we wouldn't have anything to start on. The reason that we know about the Silk Roads is because these pillagers were there 100 years ago. It's the only thing we can say.
Other question? Yes, please.
You mentioned the idea that the tombs were, that wherever there are tombs, there is interest. What were the other issues related to taking trade back and forth besides tombs?
Well, some of the people, like the question was, I had mentioned wherever there are tombs, that's because there's been trade. And yes, often people don't expect to die where they die, but they have things with them and then they're buried. So what else is going on and how's it happening? The Parthians and the Sogdians particularly are people without fixed centers, but who are traveling large territories and serving as middlemen. There are a lot of middlemen. It's rare that someone would make it all the way from China even to, well, they'd make it to Kashgar, even from China to India, certainly not China to Rome. The distance is too far and too many things are likely to happen. So there are segments of the routes, and that's really how the traveling is. And then we have a lot of gifting and we have royalty. The glass probably came to Li Xian because he saw it. The Sasanian plates probably were gifts or objects people wanted. There are a lot of Byzantine coins in Chinese tombs that probably were gifts or traded, tribute.
Politically, how do the Chinese react to the fact that so many of these objects and people were not Chinese that way?
Well, I mean, it's the same way. Tibet and Mongolia and Xinjiang province are all autonomous regions of China. And this is part of Greater China. So I don't think that there's really an issue, especially on the Silk Roads where people are traveling. I don't think there's really an issue. But if China didn't like the existence of the Silk Roads, then the green-eyed figures that we see would have never been published. But certainly nobody's denying there were foreigners. There were Europeans or West Asians in Xinjiang province.
We have one final question. Yes, please.
How many of the stopping places had permanent settlements? So were they strictly there for travelers?
So how many of these places really had permanent settlements? It depends how you define permanent. Almost everything that I showed you and mentioned today is a site, if that. But people come together, they pray together. When they pray together, they build sanctuaries, and they need statues or wall paintings or temples. How many people are necessary for that? It's hard to say. The maps I showed you aren't nearly all the sites. There are more than 100 important excavation sites just in Xinjiang province of China, and there would be many more to the east and west.
I think, Nancy, I'm going to ask you to make the draw for the, for the Silk Road catalogue.
Okay, ready? 718-584. 718-584.
With that, I'd like to thank Nancy Steinhardt for a dazzling tour along with an amazing tour de force. I think you'll all agree, of so many places, so many works of art, so many treasures, so many of which will be here next February. So thank you all for coming. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that on the 19th of October, for those of you who have this fetishism for the Silk Road, the American Institute of Archaeology has a lecture here by Roberto Nardi on the mosaics from Zutma, which is the first stop on the Silk Road from a Roman site, great Roman site. He'll be talking on those mosaics. If you don't like the Silk Road, where you can have vampires on October the 21st. And lastly, the next in this series is Mr. Silk Road, as he was called earlier on, Victor Mayer, talking about mummies of the Tarim Basin. We look forward to seeing you at that, and certainly some of the other talks here and in the Rainy Theatre. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Nancy.
Will this be archived on the website as well? Okay.
Hopefully, I think so, the audio might have dropped in and out.
Oh, okay. Well,
Better next time, right?
I uploaded her PowerPoint in here, and when I switched to the image close-up from her PowerPoint, it didn't take her audio.
Oh.
But I figured it out pretty early on, so.
Okay.
Are you going to be
Next time we'll be
streaming the
better.
other?
Yes, yeah, we're gonna, and I'll have all the bugs, you know, figured out by then. So yeah, we'll stream the other ones too.
okay, great.
And you're being broadcast live right now.
Yeah.